I'd like to welcome everybody, and for those that don't know me, Doug Nelson. I'm one of the vice presidents at the Timken Company. So today we've got several guest speakers, and one of the things that you're going to see from myself, the speakers, etc., is a lot of transparency, a lot of openness, and a lot of honesty. A couple common themes you're going to hear, and some of it is depending on where the conversation goes, it can get pretty tough. I will share this. As I got involved, there was 95% of everything I learned. My jaw was just hitting the floor lower and lower and lower. I couldn't believe that this was going on. Some things parents need to parent. Communicate with your children. Family time, extremely important. Schools need your help just like we need the schools' help. And then we'll touch on social media a little bit as well. So before I invite Joe and Marty up, who are going to be two of our guest speakers on the panel here, I want to share a little something about the schools. I have been involved now at the highest levels with the schools for about 4 weeks. They're doing a phenomenal job. And what they are battling, and at the administrative level, at the teacher level, some of these, educators, professionals are going 24/7 right now watching our children with events that are going on. And you'll hear a little bit about that as we go. By no means should any of us, if there's an event, point the finger at the schools, okay? You're going to hear what they're doing, and it is quite amazing what has been done in the past, all the way up to what's been done a week ago, and how, from an administrative leadership, the teachers, and what they're being put through are just top-notch. And I would just say this, as events happen, hopefully they won't, but as they do, we need to be patient, and we need to let the schools run through their process and be there to support them. So with that in mind, I'd like to welcome Joe Chaddock along with Marty Bose.
Good afternoon, everyone. Timken Company, thanks for having us. So first of all, I'm Joe Chaddock. I'm the superintendent of the Stark County Educational Service Center. To my left is Marty Bowe, assistant sup. Minerva High School graduate, lifelong Minerva resident, and raising right now 4 children through the Minerva local schools, 3 current students, and I have 1 at Mount Union University in Mount Union now. Marty here to my left, Canton South High School grad, United States Air Force Academy, former superintendent, and Marty kind of heads up technology in our organization. So just to give you the big picture of what we do. So the Educational Service Center, there's 52 of our units in the state of Ohio. So we provide services, direct, indirect, to 22 public school districts in Stark County and the surrounding areas. So those services include from insurance to technology, curriculum support, occupational therapy, physical therapy, mental health support. Basically, we're there to support schools, and we serve approximately 70,000 students, pre-K to 12, in 22 districts. So with that being said, Marty, anything else to add before we get rolling here? So you're up.
We'll turn it up. So Joe and I have been working side by side for about a month, and a lot of what I've learned, we'll try sharing through a bit of a question and answer that goes on. But one of the items, Joe, I think that would be very helpful is sort of the day in the life of the teacher right now, or the administrator, as to what's going on within the schools themselves, specifically on the suicide.
So Maslow's hierarchy of basic needs, it's a simple psychological principle that it's a pyramid. Before a youngster, an adult, can hit the top of the pyramid, which is self-actualization, we need to meet the most basic needs, which are safety, love, belonging, hope, family, all those basic areas a kid needs or an adult needs to be happy and successful. Where we're really struggling right now with all the things we have going on is we're having a real difficult time meeting a high number of our students' basic needs. So we are at epidemic proportion in our community and surrounding communities. You're going to hear some numbers. To date, since August 1, we've had 11 suicides of our students directly in Stark County. This is not just a Stark County problem. It reaches every county around us and it covers the whole state of Ohio. So the trend that's very, very troubling to us is this storm has been building over time. Our kids are just coming with issues to the table. And I'm going to talk about two words that we're trying to combat, and that's the words hopeless and helpless. So, our job in a public school is to teach kids. That's our number one role, is to provide a quality, comprehensive education. So what we're finding the role of our educators is turning to is we feed them breakfast, we feed lunch, we wash their clothes, we provide basic needs, basic care. And this isn't everywhere, but again, I'm talking about the segment of our population that is suffering. And it depends on the school district. Every one of our 22 school districts has a different culture, different expectations, parenting, backgrounds, community, church involvement of the kids. So the struggle that we're dealing with right now, the epidemic, is our kids it's a tough time to grow up, and it's a really tough time to be a parent. Social media is one of the factors that we're really having a difficult time managing and controlling. The things that are said, that a lot of our youngsters' brains are not developed adequately to handle the things that happen on there. Some of the lack of social interaction, communication. And again, these are things that are a community issue. They're parents, they're all of us together, coming together to try to solve them. Marty, got anything to add?
I think Joe mentioned the districts within Stark County. We've actually had calls from schools outside of Stark County to come join us as well. One of the things that Marty and Joe, both you guys, I think, very unique within Stark County, or maybe it isn't unique, but the training program that you've put your teachers through and sort of the processes, et cetera, when an event such as a suicide, happens. You guys have gone through a tremendous amount of training, and I think it would be good for the parents to hear it.
So 11 of these tragedies this year, they've all been a little different. So to let you know how serious the problem is. So there's a couple stages on the seriousness of a student when they exhibit signs of wanting to hurt themselves. Our professionals are going to speak here into detail of that. We're not mental health experts. But so when a young person conveys, or a student at school conveys that a child has suicidal tendencies, a number of steps take place. So obviously the counseling teams inside our schools, our mental health people inside our schools, our administration, try to get with the parent, handle it, deal with it, get treatment, get a program set up to wrap around each one of these kids. So the problem we're facing, of these 11 students that committed suicide, only 2 were on the school's radar. And as a parent, I understand why some of our other adults and parents have a difficult time communicating with the schools about some of the things that are going on in the home, or some of the things that kids are telling parents. So as a father, if my son would come to us and say he was having issues, that my wife and I would do everything we could to get him help. And so are we comfortable communicating this with school professionals? And what we're finding out is we only know about less than a quarter of the issues that go on with our kids. Because if I take my child to Akron Children's and they're in there for the weekend and they're with great counselors, that there's no obligation for me to communicate as a parent with the school. In the hospital under HIPAA and all the rules, because I understand parents are worried about a stigma being attached to their child. So what we're finding, though, is a lot of these things, so if you would communicate with us, it's an extremely confidential process. And it's extremely important that we get as many of our professionals inside being with your kid, as well as external professionals working together to provide maximum resources to wrap around that kid. It's, again, the numbers are staggering that we're dealing with, of attempts, of ideation. I mean, we're over 20% of our population right now of those 70,000 are expressing or having issues, or we're trying to get into counseling to get them help. You want anything to that, Marty?
This is just the part where we desperately need your help as parents, neighbors, aunts, uncles, grandmas, grandpas, however it fits. We only have them for about 6.5 hours a day, and the vast majority of that is spent in instruction. It's not on a social interaction level. The things you will hear your child talk about or your neighbor talk about, they might not talk about in school. That's what we need to hear. We need to know those things. So please listen, please act, call the school, drop them an email, anything, just so that we can get the right folks in touch with the kids.
Yeah, so these gentlemen are being a little bit kind, but behind the scenes, the quantity of training, no different in the business world, right? We have processes that we followed. Over the last decade, 5 years, 2 years, 2 months, 2 weeks, what they've put in place for this crisis management continues to be refined, and it's not just in a school within a 10-mile radius, but it's throughout the county in the 22 districts. So pretty amazing what they've done. I have children, 4 children, they're in the school. Unfortunately, one of the schools that they were in went into a lockdown. The kids all knew what to do. They knew what level it was. So what the administrators, teachers, superintendents, principals are doing are really quite amazing in some pretty tough times. So I want to, before we jump into sort of the dialogue around a little more bluntness on, as parents, what should we be doing? One of the meetings I sat through that was a pretty, staggering comment that was made by one of the experts was this: the kids today are talking about suicide very openly amongst themselves, like we talk about a cup of coffee. Hey, is it too strong? Is it a blonde, a black? Do you want sugar, etc.? So our conversations around a coffee table that we're having, the kids are having more of a dialogue around suicide. It's a very comfortable dialogue. I don't understand it, getting educated on it. But I will say, as parents now, we've got to get engaged, in our own call to action and talk with our kids, grandkids, and whatever it may be. And again, throughout this meeting, we're going to share some of that. So with that in mind, I think just some candid words to wisdom to parents, from the school perspective. And keep in mind, as they're sharing this, and Marty hit it, think between 7 a.m. and 3 p.m., where are your kids, your nieces, your nephews, your grandkids? They're at school, right? They're with these teachers and these administrators and all the hard work that's going on behind. But there are things the schools need each of us sort of to do if any of our children or our loved ones are in a distressed environment, to become a little bit knowledgeable and let the schools help us. So I'll turn it over. Any words of wisdom to the parents here?
Yeah, so as a parent, there is no playbook right now on raising kids in this culture, this very positive media culture we have, and I'm being sarcastic. So I guess just suggestions. So first of all, from the school, if you're a parent, never ever pit the child in the middle between the school. The school's right. We're not always going to be right. When we're not, never let your kid know. Come and meet with us privately. Meet with your staff. Have many of you been at a sporting event lately when you've heard parents and watched the behavior of our parents blow up on referees, blame people, curse, act crazy? So just the level of being a role model and how we approach the word blame. So again, there's so many different factors into raising our kids right now. So I'm just going to start with social media time. It is okay to limit your child to a certain amount of social media time each day. A recommendation, my wife, I didn't even realize she was doing it years ago, but at 9 o'clock, all the phones in our house go on the counter for the evening. Well, typically not mine, but all of theirs. And so what we're finding is the majority of the social network time, because we can see it out there on the web, even off our networks, happens between midnight and 4 a.m. with our current school-age population. That's the majority of the chatter is going on between midnight and 4 a.m. Real simple. Limit social media time. And I know as a parent right now, running multiple kids, we don't have, like when I was growing up, suppers at 5 o'clock every night. So little things that I'm starting to do is when we're in the car, the radio shut off. That time in between practices, all the other time, going to see grandma, whatever it is, we're spending more time talking, communicating, special events. I never realized how important 4-H was in my kids' lives, but anything you can find with your kid that you have a common bond with to spend time and build relationship. So social media has become a babysitter for us. And even as a parent, I found myself, it's real easy when our kids are young to put the iPad in front of them so they're entertained so you can do other things. The reality is chores are a good thing for our kids. A cycle of bedtime. Those things we were raised on are very, very important still raising kids. Structure, security. If you go to church, go to lunch after church. Cell phones are put away. Just get into some family rituals. I had a mentor when I was a young teacher who I became an assistant principal pretty early on in my career, and I was away from home a lot, and she would tell me, I would always ask for parenting advice, she would say, listen, it's about quality, not quantity. If you're a grandparent, I don't think it matters if you're a single parent or you have a traditional, just wonderful family and support network for your kid. We get so caught up in our lives every day and all the craziness. It's so critical right now that we're listening and talking to our children. They're struggling, communicate about school. We're trying to do the best we can, but we certainly can't do this alone. We are in bad shape right now. Our teachers are stressed, our administrators are stressed, our bus drivers are stressed. The whole system is under tremendous stress. And obviously, 11 deaths since August. We are at an all-out crisis. We brought national experts in from Texas and from Rhode Island who do this 30 years experience. They said this region of Ohio is the worst they've ever seen in the country right now. That we are in a very, very serious state of affairs. So Marty, I'm gonna turn it over. That's my 2 cents. You wanna jump in, add anything?
No, it's good stuff. I think we struggle to see what is different with this generation compared to us and why is this happening. I think every generation asks that. But I think the one thing that is truly different with our kids is they have access and knowledge of world events like never before. Growing up, I had no clue, and I was raised in a great family. I had no clue what was going on in the world. I didn't stay up to 11 o'clock to watch the news with my dad, and I certainly didn't read the paper. So I really had no idea what was going on. These kids, 15 times a day, have every bad event that's happened worldwide jammed down their throat when they open their phone. Their brains are not ready to handle that. That's why we need you so bad. Yours are closer. I don't know if mine is. There's days that I look at my phone and I get down, right? We all do. That's what sells papers. That's what sells news. But we have to be there for our kids to let them know the world is still a good place and there's hope and people are still good. You're the one that can get that message across to them. What we need with our kids is just one loving adult. That's it. If there's somebody that cares, that kid's gonna be okay. We said this earlier, the fact that you are all in here, the odds of any of your kids having an issue is 1 in a million. You cared enough to come today. When I was a superintendent, we would have a top 25 banquet at the end of graduation to honor our top kids. Some of you probably had kids there. It was standing room only. There were so many parents and grandparents there you couldn't get a seat in the room. The other end of the spectrum, when the poor kid had done so much bad stuff that we actually had to throw them out of school and expel them, when I had the expulsion meeting, it would take me 5 minutes to figure out who was in the room. Now, who are you? I'm the ex-stepdad. Okay, why are you here? Well, I was married to mom. Where's she? Jail. Where's dad? No clue. Who are you? I'm the next door neighbor. What are you doing here? Kid's been living with me. Okay, who are you? I'm the former grandparent. Why are you here? I'm suing for custody. Imagine how mad that little guy is. He didn't do anything to deserve all this. He's upset. He's reacting. He's getting to what Joe said. Hopeless. I have no hope. And then I open my phone and see the world's a piece of crap. Nah, suicide's an option, might as well take that one. One person can make a difference in that. You're going to hear from our mental health experts later, but they'll tell you, when you look at any suicide, there were 10 things that had to go right. If one of those had been broken, we'd still have the young person. I watched a video just recently on a young man that said, I was going to be a school shooter. I was done. I had my mind made up. It was going to be the next morning. That night before, one of his friends just saw it. He just doesn't look right. Said something to his mother. The mom said, hey, why don't you invite him over for dinner? Invited him over for dinner, baked him a pie just for him. Silly. Saved the kid's life. Completely turned it around. So what we ask of you is just be involved. Just be involved. When you see a young person, don't just ask how their day was, because they're going to give you the same answer every time, right? Fine. Ask them something silly. How was lunch? What'd you eat for lunch? What'd your best friend wear to school today? What was the dumbest thing they made you do today? We do dumb things. Just get them talking. And then when they're done talking, ask them what else. I say that to my kids so many times, they're so sick of me. One time my daughter goes, you know what, Dad? I'm going to put that in your headstone. Here lies Dad. What else? Just keep asking them. They'll keep talking. Great thing to do is have kids over your house. Stay within earshot. You will be amazed what you learn. And if there's anything that gives you any pause, give us a call. Give us an email. But just keep asking. Get in their life. They need you. After 15 minutes, they might open up and say something that clicks your adult brain to go, hey, whoa, wait a minute. This is a bad road. Let's talk. You don't have to be an expert. You just have to be involved.
Thanks, Marty. We do want to hit one more topic, and that's security in the schools. So before I turn that over to Joe to share with us what is happening within the schools with some of the latest events in our county and in the country, I want to share more from a dad approach and what I've learned from these guys here over the last month or so and the other specialists. One item is the suicide is a tough word to talk about and with. And we brought in experts that are going to be up next on more of a formal presentation to talk and share with you how do you have this conversation. But begin the conversation with your kids. If for whatever reason you are sitting here and you know your child, granddaughter, grandson, whoever it is, had attempted suicide, took too many drugs, whatever it was, in our society it's a stigma, right? Keep it quiet. We can deal with it within the family nucleus. And I get it, and I understand it. What Joe had said earlier about, can you please call the schools and let them know in confidence, is extremely important. Because all of a sudden then, you've got teachers, the bus drivers, whoever it is in confidence that the schools have pulled in to be watching your child who had an episode whenever it was, and you have an extra set of eyes on them between 7 a.m. and 3 p.m. So as painful or embarrassing, whatever the word is, whatever the feeling you may have, pick up the phone and call them. It's in confidence, share it with them. They're able to help while we're all here at the office. So with that, I'm going to ask Joe to shed some light on the security side of the schools.
Well, right now it's, again, we're in total crisis mode on that side, especially since last week's horrific tragedy in Florida. So let me just back up when our landscape drastically changed was 10 or more years ago out in Colorado in Columbine. So since then, I can tell you the 22 public schools we deal with have taken safety and security, again, Maslow's bottom level of basic needs. If a kid doesn't feel safe at school, they're not going to learn. So for at least 10 years, so we started at the formation of district committees with law enforcement, counselors, administrators, teachers, and then we've refined that process year in and year out. So we meet monthly. There's district teams, there's building teams, law enforcement's involved, fire, police, etc. So about 3 years ago, we actually began to contract with the Department of Homeland Security. We work with, obviously, the Sheriff's Office and our local law enforcement. So we actually started about 3 years ago, Homeland Security come in and do a building-by-building assessment. So in our 22 school districts, that represents approximately 120 school buildings. So district safety plans, building safety plans, transportation safety plans, stadium extracurricular safety plans. So safety plans are not a public record. So, and just to kind of go back to the second nightmare that's happened last week, which was at Jackson. So if you look at what happened there in the situation and the ugliness, so the question we continue to get is, well, how do we get this thing? How do we get this kid get this weapon? We need to have metal detectors at the doors. We need to have, more police. So what I can tell you is our consultants, even on the ground, because we'll do whatever right now to protect our kids. So the problem with metal detectors right now for us is bringing 2,000 kids in to a single point of access, and then you have a soft target outside. We secure that. We got buses now. We have just multiple issues. So we are researching, we're looking, we're working with the FBI, the Bureau of Criminal Investigation, our professional law enforcement, and I can tell you right now, if they recommend airport security, we're going to put it in. So again, right now, money's not an object. The safety of our kids, it's a difficult thing. This little guy went through the bus with friends, talked to numerous people in the morning, and the weapon was hidden. So again, it scares the heck out of all of us. So the safety of each of us, whether it's in a movie theater, the grocery store, a school, a church, we're just in a difficult place right now. And last week really triggered, you can see the statement from the sheriff today. We've arrested approximately a dozen young people for making threats on social media. The sheriff's asked that we sit down with all of our kids in Stark County, which we have in the last 24 hours, or it's happening today, just to communicate with them individually. We have superintendents that haven't slept, 3 last night, dealing with direct threats either to kids, suicidal, or hunting kids down, banging on doors at all hours of the night, to indirect threats from the school over social media. Our law enforcement are taking an extremely hardline stance. We've beefed up security in all of our schools. That's going to continue. Can we do enough? I don't think we can ever do enough. But again, just let you know how serious we take this. This is our #1 ultimate priority. These two issues together, if you are suicidal, you may be homicidal. So this is why our school leaders are so anxious right now. And I think this is why what's great, what's happening here, this opportunity, we're not going to solve this problem in the 6 hours we have those little guys. So there's a law that is called in loco parentis. When you put your child on the bus, we assume the role of parent legally. And that falls directly on the superintendent. So there's a lot of pressure that's shared through the administrative ranks, the counselors, the teachers, the bus drivers, the cooks, the custodians, to have a safe environment. The last thing, and again, it's so difficult with the book bags, the band instruments. We're talking about thousands and thousands of kids in and out of the doors, recess. And we are on such high alert, pins and needles right now. This is going to take a community effort to turn this around. And we just continue to ask for your support. Marty, you have anything to add to that?
Thank you. It's good. Sorry about that. Just that we thank you, like Joe said, and Doug, we appreciate you guys so much because we can't do it alone. If you look back at all the tragedies that have happened in school systems, none of them were done in a vacuum. Every child that acted out left some sort of sign, said something to someone. If we could have just had the someone that heard it act on it, or had a parent hear them talk about it. Just as Joe said, we sound like a broken record, but we can't do this alone. We've got to have you involved. Take one little person under your wing. Mentor one person. If everybody took one, then it would turn into 2 and 3, and you would get as much out of it as they would. But that's what we need.
Okay. Joe, Marty, much appreciated. I'd like to next invite up both Allison and Jeff, who are on the mental health side of the county agency, public agencies, and they're going to run through a program that you'll be able to see on the screens here.
Good afternoon, everyone. I just wanted to thank you all very much for taking time out of your busy day to come and hear this presentation today. I'm Allison Esber. I work as a Systems Initiative Manager at Stark County Mental Health and Addiction Recovery. I've been working there for about 3 years. Prior to that, worked at a crisis center, have a master's degree in social work. And so a lot of the work that I do is based around suicide prevention. I organize our Suicide Prevention Coalition here in Stark County, which is a group of individuals really working to address the suicide issue here. And I'll turn things over to Jeff to introduce him.
Good afternoon. My name is Jeff Allen. I serve as the Executive Director of the Crisis Intervention and Recovery Center. I as well appreciate Timken's invitation through Doug to come in and speak on behalf of our organization. Our organization started in 1971 as a volunteer hotline, and since then we've grown to having 20 programs at 2 sites. My background a little bit is that after serving in the military, I actually started volunteering on a hotline, and I've been with the organization for 10 years. I've also been involved in the criminal justice arena, starting 2 drug court programs and a prison diversion program. So it's our hope that what we can share with you will bring awareness and education and how to help those that you may be concerned about. Thank you.
And so just starting off of, whenever we do presentations, we always hope that we learn something from it. So today we have some learning objectives on the screen, just kind of talking about what we hope to accomplish. But just jumping into some of the statistics, just because we know that data is so important. And so when we talk about a problem in the community, what's the data to support that? So nationally, we know that suicide is the 10th leading cause of death overall in the United States. It's the second leading cause of death between 15 and 34-year-olds, and the third leading cause of death between 10 and 14-year-olds. We know that 44 Americans die by suicide in the U.S. every year, and almost 6,000 of those are under the age of 24. Contrary to popular belief, older white males actually have the highest rates of suicide, but we know that youth suicides have continued to increase over the last 5 to 10 years very significantly, as our community is now seeing as well. We've seen an increase in minority deaths by suicide, especially in populations that had previously been, it was almost unheard of, especially, for example, African American women. That was usually one of the most protected groups of individuals, but we've seen rates among all groups start to rise. We know that suicide impacts all ages, races, gender, socioeconomic status, cultural and religious backgrounds. No one is immune to suicide, but we know that hopefully with more education, we can hopefully help prevent future suicide deaths from occurring. Additionally, we know that veterans are at higher risk of suicide. I think most people may be aware of the statistic that 22 veterans die by suicide every day. We know that non-deployed veterans actually have a slightly higher incidence of suicide than deployed veterans. And we also know that LGBTQ youth are 3 times more likely to attempt suicide. We know that individuals, the more likely that they are to attempt, or the more often that they have attempts, the more likely that they are to die by suicide. Even though we know that most individuals who have an initial attempt do not go on to die by suicide. So there is hope in getting treatment. This is a slide, and it may be very difficult to see, but this is a slide from the Center for Disease Controls that looks at all of the causes of death among all age groups. And so the ones that are most important to know are the green. Green represents suicide. The red represents homicide, and blue is unintentional injury, so motor vehicle accidents, accidental overdoses. So as you can see, suicide is in one of the top 10 causes for almost all of the age groups except for the couple N ones. But it is, again, the 10th leading cause of death overall. So some data for Stark County. Stark County in 2016, which is the latest full year that we have on record as far as getting our data and reports back, we had 77 suicide deaths in our population. We have about 375,000 people in Stark County, which translates to about 20 individuals per 100,000 in Stark County who've died by suicide. When we look at youth, previously our youth suicide rate was about 6 per 100,000. More recently, after the 11 that we've experienced in Stark County, it's closer to 40 per 100,000. So it's been a significant increase. We know that Stark County, we have a higher rate than the national and state average of females who die by suicide versus male. Nationally, it's about 3.5 to 4 males for every 1 female who dies by suicide. We know that about 90% of individuals who die by suicide have some type of underlying mental health or substance use issue. Whether they've been treated for it, that's a different story. But again, recognizing the warning signs and being able to refer people to treatment greatly lowers their risk of dying by suicide. We've also been looking at the link between opiate use and suicide. 2016 was the highest year that we had on record for opiate overdoses with 118. So we are exploring that link a little bit more to see is there a connection between those two, since we know that substance use and mental health go very much hand in hand. For Stark County, the more recent data that we do have, the data from 2017 is not finalized. We are still waiting on some reports, but we were fortunate to see a slight decrease in the number of deaths that we had, with 70 that are confirmed, again, although we do have a couple of reports that are still pending investigation by the Stark County Coroner's Office. We've had, in the last part of the calendar year, we had 5 youth suicide deaths. January of 2018, we again have had 5 youth suicide deaths, bringing our total to 10 as of January. And obviously, I think everyone's aware of the most recent one in February. We've also had 3 adults who have died by suicide in January as well. Again, so that just shows the significant increase in youth suicide that we have experienced here in Stark County. This next slide talks about suicide deaths by age. And so the Stark County Suicide Prevention Coalition has been tracking this data since 2002. And so you'll see the highlighted portions are the youth population that we're looking at. And so the far left column looks at the year, the far right column looks at the total for that year, and then the columns in between talk about those different age groups. So as you can see, the 0 to 14, we have unfortunately lost 8 individuals to suicide from 2002 to 2016. We have also lost 80 individuals in that 15 to 24-year-old age range. Most of those, and I can tell you from the data that we have, most of those individuals in that 15 to 24-year-old age range are typically in the 19 to 24-year-old age range. So we are looking at going back and pulling out the 14 to 18-year-old age range, 15 to 18-year-old age range, to see what are those factors that are different, because we know that what high school students are dealing with versus what young adults, college-age students are potentially dealing with are very different. And so the interventions that we would hopefully put in place will be different for those populations. So I'll turn things over to Jeff to talk about some signs and symptoms.
Okay, we always think it's really important that to help people become aware of what to look for whenever there's situations, and then the next step is to learn what you can do to help. I just want to share with you the value of prevention, how this works as we tailor through our presentation. Real life situation, working with a youth recently who we outreached to because a friend had seen in their text that they were going to kill themselves that evening. Through that process and through that engagement with that student, it came upon us that she knew of someone else who was texting the same. So it's that information sharing and the connecting of others and sharing it and making it aware of people who need to know, that through that process, the other youth was able to be engaged and helped that day as well. So as we share this, it's really important to share this with others. And as we give you information about this, it really is in the hope to prevent suicide, because it really is preventable if we have an awareness and a commitment to continue to help our community through these times. So when we talk about signs and symptoms, signs is things that you see in a person, and the symptoms are things that people report. So if you're seeing someone who's very lethargic and is just really dragging, who really seems very depressed and withdrawn, those would be signs. Symptoms, someone could say, today I'm feeling very anxious, or I'm very depressed. I have no appetite, I'm losing weight. So there's a differentiation of those two. So just, overall, these are real global presentation materials. But, if someone's basically saying they're going to hurt themselves, or, I might be better off dead, there's no reason for me to go on. The world would be a better place without me. I'm a burden to others. There's no hope in my situation. I never see it changing. Those are significant signs that someone may be at risk to actually start contemplating suicide. Writing about suicide or death, becoming preoccupied with death. And a lot of these signs and reports also correlate with depression as well, which we know is a significant influencer of suicide. Difficulty thinking, feeling hopeless, feeling trapped. Usually what happens is when we speak to folks who we engage post-overdose or post-attempt, what we find is that they were to the point in their life they saw no options at all. And they really viewed suicide as the only measure to alleviate that pain. And often it's emotional pain. So when you think about that, people go, I'm sure you've heard of this term, but it's tunnel vision, and it just narrows down where at the end of that tunnel, that's really their perceived option. So early intervention's critical before the signs and symptoms start becoming more prevalent and more in number. Anxiety, giving away belongings, and what we're also finding too is, if you're noticing someone starting to use drugs or alcohol more frequently, there's usually something connected with that. And I think it's really important to be aware of that and really kind of be open and be connected to that person during that time. The risk factors, we talked a little bit, I know our school team talked about there's really no one single causal factors. We always see things as being multi-determined. So usually what happens is, and a lot of these examples are given from working with people who have attempted, because those people were really on that path to suicide. So what we find is a lot of people, there's usually financial stressors. A significant causal factor are relationships and not being connected to others, just feeling like they're worthless, hopeless, helpless, and usually a major significant life event. So if you already have risk, if you have risk signs and symptoms, if you keep continuing to find or experience additional stressors, it just continues to compound the problem. We talked a little bit earlier about the risk factors, and again, just looking at losses, previous suicide attempts, health problems, limited coping skills, low self-esteem. Usually what happens is, if someone's growing up and, whenever things are very stressful for them, oftentimes, if that person elects to use substances to kind of curtail a lot of those stresses, we're looking at coping mechanisms. If things are going awry in their home and they really don't have anyone to link with or what have you, they might start looking for other means to alleviate some of that emotional pain. We see a lot of people, you may hear of things like people who cut to alleviate emotional distress. Sometimes that then just continues to escalate into suicide attempts. And I'll turn it over for Alice.
And so we know that with every risk factor, those can all be mitigated by protective factors. So they do exactly what they are called. They protect young people, they protect individuals. And so we know that the more risk factors someone has, the potentially higher risk they may be, but the more protective factors they are, the more protected they are. And so some of the things that are on the screen here, we can really use to our advantage if you're working or if you know someone who may be experiencing any number of risk factors. So even if a young person may say, my parents are getting a divorce and there's financial troubles at home and I'm failing classes at school and a laundry list of things. But if they can say, but I love school even though I'm struggling with it, I'm getting a tutor, I know that things are gonna get better. If they can identify some of those protective factors, those reasons for living, that's huge. We know that young people who have close relationships or responsibilities with their families, if they have a strong support network with their family members and other people in their life, that sense of connectedness, that's extremely beneficial for a protective factor. And we know that this is one of the things that when you also talk about older adults who die by suicide, their sense of connectedness oftentimes decreases. And so that sense of connectedness, having those support systems with family and friends is so vital. We know that young people who may have a fear of death or dying, that's an actual protective factor, as well as if they have a personal, religious, or cultural belief that suicide is bad. If they're actively engaged in their work and in school, if they have high self-esteem. And so that's one thing that adults can really help to foster that self-esteem and really build young people up. So often I think that young people put a lot of pressure on themselves to perform, that they have to get straight A's, where I think that most parents and most adults would be perfectly happy with B's and a couple C's. And so making sure that we let the kids know that that's okay if you're not, you don't have to be perfect as long as you're trying your best and building up that self-esteem. Again, if life skills, knowing how to problem solve, knowing how to effectively cope, being able to verbalize how you're feeling, knowing when you're stressed out, what are some of those coping things that you do? Do you exercise? Do you talk to your friends? Do you listen to music? Do you go fishing? What are some of those coping strategies that you use when you're having a really bad day? And those are important for adults, but especially for young people, because if they're not learning those things when they're 5, 6, 7, we all know that life is stressful no matter what age you are, and it sometimes only gets more stressful the older you get. So knowing what works for them as far as how they cope is vital. And again, their ability to adapt to change. We know that life is ever changing, and their ability to adapt to that is very important. And again, we know that individuals who are engaged in behavioral health or another treatment, that's a protective factor as well. We know that untreated mental illness is very common in individuals who die by suicide. But if they are in treatment, if they are getting that help, that can greatly lower their risk of suicide. So again, when we're engaging with youth, some of the most important things is, again, building them up. So the Search Institute has what they call 40 developmental assets, and they kind of break them down into to 8 different groups. And so those are all listed in this first one under developmental assets. So offering support, knowing that youth feel supported is extremely important in them to their development. Letting youth be empowered, letting them know that they can make decisions, appropriate decisions for their age group. And then also, I know Joe and Marty and Doug talked about this, but having boundaries and expectations and making sure that your young people in your life are aware of those things. Young people, as much as they may push against it, oftentimes crave some structure, because oftentimes they may not be feeling that in a lot of what they're experiencing in their life. So setting those boundaries, setting those expectations that we expect you to do chores, we expect you, to have that grade. You're going to leave your phone on the kitchen counter at 9 p.m. All of those things that were talked about before. If there's a constructive use of time, we know that oftentimes young kids don't want to read, they'd rather play video games or watch TV, but having that constructive use of time and fitting in, being mindful of that. If they have a commitment to learning, they have positive values in their life. If they have social competencies, so they know how to engage, they know how to verbalize what they're feeling, they know how to connect with other people and have conversations. And if they have a positive self-identity. We also know that young people who have a trusted adult, that is one of the most important factors that a young person has. Oftentimes that's their parent, sometimes it's their friend's parent, sometimes it's a teacher, a coach, a youth pastor, someone in their life who they know that if something is going so wrong, they have someone to talk to. And so if you have children and you don't feel like you are that person for them, develop a relationship with the person who you think that is. So that way if they're going to a friend's parent and saying, I'm having this issue, I just had a breakup with my boyfriend, and that way the parent can come back to you and say, hey, your child told me this, here's how we can work through this together, I just wanted you to be aware. But develop that relationship as a trusted adult. And if you know that there's a young person that doesn't have a trusted adult, try to be that trusted adult for them, so that way they aren't just going to friends and having those situations happen where it's, oh, I saw this or I overheard this and I don't know what to do about it, so I'm just not going to do anything. We want to make sure that they're telling adults that they can trust. Again, teach youth warning signs. They can't spot the warning signs in their peers if they don't know about them. Encourage them to be inclusive. We know that young people, if they're inviting others in and creating that inclusive environment, that's going to be very beneficial in promoting that self-esteem and encouragement among their peers. And then talk to youth about suicide. And so talking to youth about suicide, we know, is probably one of the most difficult conversations any adult will have in their life. I know Jeff and I have both worked on crisis hotlines before where we talk about suicide every single day. And sometimes it's a very difficult question to ask the question, are you thinking of suicide? Because it's a scary question because you don't know what the answer is going to be. And if they say yes, then what do you do? And so hopefully with this presentation, that'll also help be able to provide you with some answers. So when you want to have that conversation, and that conversation is so, so vitally important, again, it's scary, but it has to be done. And saying the words, asking them directly and saying, are you thinking about suicide? Have you ever thought about killing yourself? Do you know anyone who's thought about suicide? Those are all perfectly okay questions to ask. We'll talk about some of the myths in the next slide, but those do not cause people to think about suicide. So pick a good time. Don't pick a time when you know it's going to be rushed. When you're driving, 5 minutes to drop them off at school before a basketball practice, that's probably not the best time. But pick a time, on Sunday afternoon when you know that their homework's done and they're just kind of hanging out, that you have a couple hours that if they do say yes, how can you start to process that? Practice and rehearse. So get a friend, another family member, have the conversation with them, practice what that's going to be like. Actually say the words, are you thinking about suicide? And make sure that you feel comfortable with what that answer may be. Admitting it's a difficult conversation for you too, that can kind of just put everyone at ease, because sometimes when you're having difficult conversations with young people, they're uncomfortable too. And so putting it all out on the table and saying, I know this is hard for you, it's really hard for me too, but I'm just worried. Be direct, again, asking those direct questions. Have you ever thought about suicide? Have you thought about harming yourself? Those are, again, perfectly good questions to ask. Listen openly, don't judge, don't overreact, don't underreact, just listen. Sometimes that's exactly what people need, is just to be heard. And again, focus on what you've noticed. So in counseling and social work field, we often use I statements a lot. So I've noticed this, and being able to say, I noticed that you haven't been wanting to hang out with your friends, or that you haven't been wanting to go to school when that's something that you always used to enjoy. And use those as kind of starting points to say, I'm paying attention to what's going on and I'm concerned. Unfortunately, with everything that's going on in our community, it's even more important to have these conversations, but it also provides a really good starting point to say, I know there's been a lot of information in the news lately about suicide and safety at schools. How has that been making you feel? Have any of your friends ever talked about suicide? What would you do if your friend were to tell you that they were thinking about suicide? Have you ever thought about suicide? And those can be really good prompts to at least start the conversation that they're probably already having with their peers anyways, because it is something that we're seeing in the news and is happening almost, there's something going on in the schools almost every day. So I'll turn things back over to Jeff to talk about myths.
One of an example of how, when we talk about risk and protective factors, what we do when we work with people, what we really want to do is work with a person, their family, and then with the youth in the schools, their teachers, administrators. And what we're really doing is really assessing what is the degree of risk and probability of suicide. So what we're looking at is looking at risk factors and protective factors, and our goal is to identify the number in those categories. And then what we do is kind of weigh those out. So if an individual presents with, maybe they have like 6 risk factors and 3 protective factors, we can develop a safety plan in collaboration with the school, the family, and then they could perhaps return home. If it's opposite, then what we would do is look for a higher level of care. And what that means is we would be referring them to perhaps a inpatient unit to make sure they're safe. Our goal, and as I speak soon about mobile response, our goal is to make sure that we're keeping people safe and that we're preventing suicide, and that's where it really takes an entire community. There are some myths about suicide. One is asking someone about suicide will cause them to think about suicide. I've been doing this for a while, and I can surely tell you that everyone I've asked that, they never said to me, you know what, I wasn't thinking about it until you asked me. I have never heard that, and we're talking about a lot of people. So when we talk, and Allison shared a little bit, it's very uncomfortable to ask people if those types of questions. But I think it's very important to know that it's okay to ask You're not going to like have them start thinking about it because you're asking. We talked a little bit earlier about suicide is not caused by one factor, it's multi-determined. The myth of we cannot prevent suicides, we believe that suicides are preventable. We're actually embracing, it's called Zero Suicide. It's a global framework to prevent suicide worldwide. People who talk about suicide don't do it, and suicidal people keep plans to themselves, both myths. Regarding the suicide that don't do it, you may hear someone saying all they do is talk about killing themselves, they'll never do it. They're just saying that because they want out of a situation, or it's a way to change the situation, perhaps, re-engage someone they ended their relationship with. But, the experience we have is we never take that lightly. We don't really judge why they're doing it. We identify that, acknowledge it, and help that person through that phase.
So as Jeff said, that we always take a suicide threat or statement seriously, no matter if this is the 100th time that someone has said something. We don't want it to be the time that something actually happens. And so take every threat seriously. If you're seeing things on social media, or a young person says, I saw this on social media, as we talked about earlier, or as Joe and Marty and Doug talked about earlier, with all the different things going on in the community the last few days, again, taking everything that we're seeing very, very seriously. Especially one of the most important things with young people, and encouraging them when you have that conversation, is if you hear this from a friend or a family member or someone else at your school who you just overhear it on the bus or overhear it in the bathroom, don't keep it a secret. Oftentimes we hear that young people will say, well, I told my friend told me that, but they told me that they would get in trouble, so I kept it a secret. I didn't want to get them in trouble. I didn't want to be a tattletale, any of those type of things. But we know that it's so important for young people, because we know that young people are talking about this stuff, that they don't keep it a secret, that they tell that trusted adult. Again, let people know that you care about them. Listen carefully and calmly, and without judgment, and then also provide reassurance that help is available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, which I know Jeff will talk about next, as far as navigating services and what different options that we are available. So I know that Marty, the expert that we brought in, said that this was one of the worst cases of suicide contagion that she had seen, but one of the other things that she did share is that we are very fortunate here in Stark County, and especially here at Timken, with the private resources that you have, that there are a lot of resources available if someone is thinking about suicide or needing any type of mental health care. And so we know that we are very fortunate in our community. And so I'll turn things over to Jeff to talk about navigating some services.
One of the things our team always emphasizes is stay connected with people. Allison talked a little bit about, disclosure. Give you another example is youth often, if they're experiencing ideations themselves and they know other peers that are verbalizing or texting, there's a real apprehensiveness to share that. So what we do is we talk with the youth we're working with and saying, I know that's really pretty tough, you want to keep it quiet because that's what they're asking. But we explore with the person, what would it be like knowing that information and the person actually did something and you had an opportunity and you didn't share it. It's about alleviating the burden and helping that person know that it's okay, and being there and validating that for them and encouraging them to do that. So really the services, we're a contracted provider under Stark MHAR, and the information is available on their website. There are a variety of different services currently in place throughout the county. Many of those are contracted services through Stark MHAR. We have school-based mental health services. That's where there's mental health professionals assigned to specific schools. They teach coping skills, crisis management, and things like that. There's outpatient programs, and that's where you think about a typical practitioner's office coming in, seeing a counselor. There's case management services. We have nurse practitioners, psychiatrists for medications if that's indicated. Intensive home-based services, that's where actually mental health professionals will go into people's homes. Usually about 90% of the engagements are in the home working with the family and youth. A lot of those services are helping youth that are cross-system involved, and what that means is they're having difficulties in school, they're involved in the criminal justice system, and they may have a mental health or substance use disorder or a co-occurring condition, which is both of the latter two. Crisis services, the next slide, I'm going to elaborate further on that, and then especially the mobile youth response program under our umbrella. So what we did is, in partnership with Stark-Emhart and the Stark County Sheriffs in May of 2016, we actually piloted a program called the Mobile Response Adult Program. What that means is that any time an individual in the community is experiencing an emotional crisis or a psychiatric crisis, a deputy could call us and we would deploy a mental health professional to the scene within 30 minutes. Since that time, our mobile adult program has expanded to 21 police jurisdictions, and we still stay with the Stark County Sheriff's Department. So what we did is, and I really use July of 2017 for the Mobile Youth Response Program, we really replicated that. And what we're doing now is serving the entire Stark County area with a mobile response youth program. What that means is we have a cadre of professionals, we have licensed counselors, we have social workers, a case manager, and a peer supporter. How to access that service, it's 24 hours a day. We have a call tree for both programs. Myself and other members of senior leadership are also in that call trees to make sure we have depth. So like if our counselors are out and calls come in, we'll deploy our manager. If our manager is out, we'll deploy our crisis manager. If that person's out, I may deploy. So we want to make sure we always have depth, because our promise is that we'll be there within 30 minutes. To date, we're averaging 22 minutes and 31 seconds. So we're really proud of that, and we want to make sure that continues. We also, when we pitched it to every police department at every roll call, we didn't want to overpromise and underdeliver, because you know what happens? It happens with anything you call for. You know, you're promised a certain thing, you call, and they don't deliver, whether it's business, healthcare, what's going to happen? You're not going to call back. So we were very mindful of that when we launched it. How you access this service, if you're concerned about a youth, you would call our 24-hour crisis hotline. That's on the 13th Street location. Our hotline is 24 hours a day. We're also a call center for the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline. What that means is there's a 1-800-273-TALK number, and anyone who calls that in the nation, if we have an open line, they have a trunking system that will route to any available line. So when we answer calls, that person may be calling from California, New York, what have you. So an individual who wants to access mobile youth services, they would call the hotline, which we field about 63,000 calls a year on that line alone. What they would do is say, you know, this is a situation, I'm requesting the mobile youth program to come out and meet with me and my youth, what have you. And teachers are doing this, counselors are doing this, principals are doing this. So through this, everything that's going on, we're working closer and closer and closer with the school system as well. So what we would do then is we would deploy one of our counselors to the setting. That person triages the situation, see what's going on. They'll meet with the youth, the counselors, whichever environment they're in, they're looking at getting collateral information. And then what we do is we determine what is a safety plan for this person. And that could mean staying in school. That could mean going home with parent, going home and going to a mental health provider for ongoing care. That could mean mobile response going back out that evening, or that could mean someone going in for screening for an inpatient stay. So there's a variety of dispositions is what we call them. There's 3 ways you can also call telephonically and say, this is what I've got going on. Do you have some ideas, or what should I do? That's one pathway. The second pathway is that we would coordinate a time to come out to your home or the school when that youth would be available. And then the rapid is it's acute, and we would deploy and be there within 30 minutes. Those services are continuing to expand. We actually doubled the team in the past 3 months. And just to give you an idea, last Friday we had 9 deployments from 10:30 a.m. to 5 p.m. It's not that uncommon anymore that one of our counselors going from one school, getting called and going straight to another school. But please don't hesitate if you know someone you're concerned. Please just at least call and say, hey, this is what I've got. What do you think? What do you think? And we love to help people figure things out. So I would encourage you to do that.
So, just to kind of wrap things up, the next couple slides, I know this PowerPoint will be sent out to everyone. So, but these are just some additional training resources that are available and getting involved, just because we always want to provide more information if you're interested in this.
We have these hard, heavy-weighted contact papers on purpose at the desk if you don't have one. These are designed real simple. Take it home, tape it to your cupboard door. You never know when you're going to have a problem. We want to make sure the resources are at your hand. The last and final item is the call to action. And we're all members of this society, community, however small or however big. We hope the education has helped everybody to just take that little bit of knowledge, and maybe you'll see something, you'll be able to help, you'll talk with your kids. Understand parents are meant to parent. Let's get more of that community esprit going, and have a good old-fashioned pot roast at the dinner table tonight. So thank you, everybody.